Hello there and welcome back to our podcast, I Can't Believe It's Worship. I'm Lester Sim.
And I'm Lester Ong.
And once again, this is a worship podcast for amateurs, by amateurs. We're really excited to share this episode with you because it features a panel discussion that we had with our worship pastor, Dave, in our recent worship ministry meeting, where we talked about worship and performance. So we hope you enjoy yourself and you find yourself relating to the things that we talk about, even as you join in with us audibly.
So, this plenary session, we're talking about the topic of worship and performance. And we're going to do this like a casual conversation because we've got a wealth of experience on this panel as well. Dave is obviously the worship pastor, and he's been in ministry since he was in his nappies. And he's seen so much change in the worship ministry as well over the years. Lester has also been in the worship ministry for a very long time, including a decent stint at Victory Family Center in Singapore, so a pretty large church setting as well. And so they have seen a lot of changes in worship ministry. And one of the things that often comes up in the conversation of ministry is, how does worship and performance actually interlink with each other? And as an introductory thing, and just to put the setting in place, I grew up with a lot of guilt because my worship pastor back then in my old church, not here because Dave's nice, but in my old church, she used to say to me that, Lester, you have a spirit of performance, and that was a bad thing, right? And so I had a lot of burden and guilt about that. The author of the song Draw Me Close, in an article called Worship and Performance, says, worship and performance do not mix. If you do performance and worship, it's not worship. So, if that's a setting, I'm going to ask Dave, how do you respond to that? What do you think about that sort of comment?
First, I think it's important to get your definitions correct. So, I agree with the statement if the definition is that performance is about showcasing your talents and getting attention on yourself, like a normal performance would be. And it's about, hey, look at me and how good I am and what I can do. Then yes, worship and performance do not mix at all. But if performance is rather giving your best, playing excellently and creatively, pushing the boundaries of what is musically acceptable and helpful, beneficial to our congregation, then I think there's a place for worship and performance to mix. So it depends on your definition.
Okay. Lester, any thoughts on that?
I think Dave is thinking more for a musical, but as I was thinking about this, I thought of more as a singer. I think performance, and I fully agree with Dave, that if we're thinking about it in terms of like you're directing attention to yourself, then I think that's a definite no. But I think if we define performance as doing something that you naturally wouldn't do when you're off stage, so doing something a little more, if you're a singer, like basically how you're moving and stuff like that, I think that's okay, and there's a place for that. I guess we'll get to talk about it. Yeah.
Is that inauthentic though? Like if you say you got to just do a bit more than what you normally do on stage?
The first time I was doing background Fox, and this was when I was a young teenager of 14. I remember there was someone who was serving with me that told me, whatever you do off stage, when you're on stage, amplify it by 10 times. Because like basically if you're doing whatever you regularly do off stage, it looks very small when you're on stage. And I think in that moment where that came from wasn't from a place of be someone that you're not. But I think this comes from a position of recognizing that you are leading people. And I think when you're talking about leading people, let's just talk about leadership for a very quick moment. When you're a leader, say for example, you are put in a group and for some reason you're tasked as the group leader, and you realize as a leader you have to do stuff that you otherwise wouldn't do, right? And that's because of your function as the leader. And people recognize that. People won't go, hey, why are you doing these extra things? They just recognize you have to do it. You're leading. And so I think that when you are on stage and you recognize that it's not just the worship leader that's leading. The worship leader is leading the team, congregation. But even as you're on stage, as you're playing, or as you're singing, the way you lift your hands, you're also leading people. Then I think when you go beyond, then it kind of makes sense. In a sense, you are doing something out of that leadership function. So when I think about it that way, I think it's okay, and I think it makes absolute sense.
And what does times 10 look like?
I'd say this, like if you're off stage and like for example you're basically most of the songs, right, you're 100% when you're off stage is like this. Like when you're on stage, it goes bigger, you're moving more and whatnot, because there is more movement and it shows that engagement and shows what it's like to be engaged, I guess, rather than just being completely static. One thing that I failed to talk about with that particular quote from what I heard. So I realized that you can't just leave it there and go, okay, whatever I do on stage is 10 times more than what I do off stage. But at some point in your Christian walk, you have to go, okay, at the start, I'm amplifying whatever I'm doing off stage, amplify it 10 times when I'm on stage. But at some point, you have to go, now I've got to bring where I am off stage to where I usually am on stage. Basically, you start to amp up what you are off stage, just so you are one and the same. So this means that we should have people who are off stage. It doesn't mean that when you're on stage, worshiping, off stage, you're like, okay, I'm not on stage, so I don't have to lead people. No, I think that authenticity then comes in. But that comes with maturity and I guess over time, yeah.
Okay. And then, Dave, you said the expressions of this which is okay, like, how well you play the music and that sort of stuff. Where is that line when it becomes, and I'm going to use Kelly Carpenter's words, where performance pollutes the worship. Where's that line?
There is no hard, fast, clear line. But I think there are a couple of things to bear in mind when we think about who we are on stage and how we perform. One is intention, which is just your motivation for why you do something. Making sure that it's not about, hey, look at this cool arrangement, how fun was it, Because if it's just for fun, then it's not serving anything except yourself. So if the intention is that, okay, I'm doing this to glorify God, I'm doing this because I believe that this will help bring the people to a deeper place of glorifying God and loving God and being able to worship God, then that matters. But also, just because your intention is correct doesn't mean that the perception is correct. So you can have a real good intention to do something, and if it is perceived in a way which isn't in line with that intention, then you failed anyway. So for example...
that's my worship pastor telling me that I have this spirit of performance.
But in one sense, the people dictate it. All right. So, for example, let's say on a Sunday,
the rest of the congregation seem to like me.
Oh, okay. Then
At least in my mind,
I don't want to wade into your previous trauma, but
maybe I should take the couch.
But all I'm saying is how it's received matters a lot as well. So it doesn't matter even if like the whole band, the worship leader, everyone on the stage has a particular intention of, okay, we think that this will be the best way to go. If the congregation perceives it as you are showboating right now you've distracted me from my worship to God, and I'm now focused on you and what you're doing and your cool riff and all that stuff and your nice vocal run, then I think that's where we've crossed the line. It doesn't even matter, actually.
That's hard, though, isn't it? Because what if you've got, like, half the congregation thinking you're showboating and the other one just raptured in the presence of God? I mean,
yeah,
that is quite possible, right?
Yes.
And, I have to be honest here, because sometimes some of you guys come into the back room and start giving us feedback, and it's like, yeah, I don't know, maybe that was a bit too fancy, or you tried too hard with something. I go, but I was so caught up in the presence of God. How do we reconcile these subjective positions?
Still me? Asking? Oh, okay. I don't. But I am, in general, I am cautious in nature. So I would prefer the large majority of people to, okay, if there is a majority of people who have felt put off by something, I would say, that's where I would cop it and say, okay, that for me, definitely we've crossed the line. Maybe shouldn't have done that. But also at the same time, if I was to play devil's advocate, there is a place to push the congregation to express things that they're not comfortable with. So that's something that you have to bear in mind as well.
Sorry, I'm thinking about this thing that you said, that the crowd ultimately determines. I feel like, say for example, if you're new to the church, right, or if you're put on stage and this is your expression of worship and it's extravagant and it's real, so that's just how you worship. I think within the first few weeks of you serving, it's natural for people to have that judgment of you, to go, well, this person showboating, this person is putting on a performance. I feel like there's a space to go, okay, wait it out and keep doing that if that's genuinely how you worship. And I think eventually the crowd will kind of catch on and go, okay, this is just how Lester worships, or this is how this person plays the guitar. And ultimately they recognize this is coming from a place of authenticity. And I think would you say that's okay?
Yes and no. I think that we're talking about two different factors. One is your authenticity, and one is the effect of your authenticity on someone. So just because you're authentic, but you're distracting me, you're authentically distracting me.
Oh,
Right.
I've met some of those people.
Yeah. So like you may be like jumping up on stage and like shouting over, let's say you're like super
Yes.
exhorting over the congregation
Fair.
and stuff like that, which is just your authentic self. That's I mean, no one's saying you should be inauthentic. But given that we are leaders and we are put on a stage, on a platform, in front of people to lead people, something that we just have to bear in mind all the time is the effect of what I'm doing on the people that I'm leading. So
Yes.
it's more of a responsibility than just being true to who I am.
Yeah. Can I then say that possibly a litmus test for whether or not you're performing or whether or not you're worshiping is to see what your response would be if someone comes up to you and says, Dave, maybe it's best if you stop doing this particular thing on stage, and because it's distracting. Would it be a good litmus test? Because someone who's performing will go, oh, why do I have to change? But if you are actually worshiping and you're recognizing that you have to steward and to help the crowd, engage in worship better, and if it's a distraction, then you'd be like, oh, okay, sure. I can definitely not do that. Would you say that's a good test then?
Well, 1 Samuel 15 or thereabouts has an interesting story, right? Where David is jumping with all his might and his clothes are flying off, and he's looking pretty average. Well, no, he was wearing a linen ephod, which was pretty much as bare as you can get. Not that we're encouraging that sort of behavior. but then a spectator, his wife Michal, says, how undignified you've become today as the king of Israel. And David's response was, well, I'm going to be even worse than this. And then there were dire consequences for Michal, which we won't go into. So then how does that work? Then we have a biblical precedence that says you just do what you want. Well, let me say that again. Don't we have a biblical precedence that says if I'm authentic in my worship before the Lord, then it doesn't matter how others perceive it?
I kind of got this word from someone that I was fishing with yesterday.
Is he here?
Yeah, he's on a couch with me. And he said this one thing, context. So I know we didn't really talk about it, so that's why I'm going to take that word and maybe put my spin on this. When David was dancing, correct me if I'm wrong, was he in private or was it in a public spectacle of everyone?
In a public procession, as they brought the ark back before Israel.
Oh. Well, then Dave can answer this question.
I agree. I think there are other contexts as well. So, for example, the woman with the alabaster jar is an extravagant expression of worship, which semi-offended the people around, the disciples, the Pharisees. The other couple of ladies actually who did similar things, wiping Jesus' feet and all that kind of stuff. But I wonder, context-wise, whether that is they were in a position of personal devotion versus corporate leadership. For example, what I mean is the lady with the alabaster jar was not trying to lead everybody else into worship or saying this is how you should worship. I would also say King David, even though he was positionally as king, in that context of what he was doing, was not intending to lead everybody to do the same thing also. So maybe there is a principle here that you can be as expressive as you want and authentic as you want before God, and that's good. But then when it comes to a corporate setting, there is a different contention to weigh. Because then that would go into different passages like order in worship that we see in the New Testament and stuff, where it's not just about you being your authentic self, but you submitting to the people around you and thinking of the people around you when you do your church services and speak in tongues and prophesy and all that.
I guess maybe I'm just trying to unravel my therapy here from all those years of hurt. But having said that, and this is a broader principle, right? And maybe it doesn't answer what we've been talking about directly, but I found that with whatever baggage I had in my old church, obviously when I came to FCC some 13 years ago, I didn't have that baggage. And so one of the things I found that was helpful when I started my ministry here was I was asked to join Platform really early on because I actually knew Pastor Benny from my old church. But I actually resisted. I said, just let me, slowly make my way in this church, get to know people, and serve in less limelight sort of ministries. And so I just did whatever. Like I helped with the chair stacking and the cleaning of the bins at the end of the service. Went to the prayer ministry and helped there. And eventually, I sort of worked my way through enough hearts of people for them to go, Leicester's not that bad. And so when I started leading worship on the platform, I actually just led in the normal way I did in my old church. And strangely enough, no one complained. So the principle I think there is we can actually be authentic, and we need to help the congregation also see what our authentic selves look like. That we're not just this person who's appeared out of nowhere and now is all full of excitement and flashiness.
Yes. If I was, though, to bring it to us as a worship team, I would say, though, the struggle is not that we're not bringing our authentic self on stage. Right? It's not like in my private time, I'm super extravagant, but then I come on stage and I have to be like super proper. I think actually the struggle that most of us would face is that our authentic self, when you put it up on stage, is probably not extravagant enough. And I think the struggle that we probably face with is like, why do I have to do things which feel very unnatural to me or over the top than what I would usually do if I was standing in the congregation or worshiping in my own private time? And so I think that's probably the question we have to deal with more.
So how would you answer that? How would you encourage us?
I would encourage, with what Lester said, first and foremost, that the stage requires more because you're now put into a position of leadership, right? And so our role has changed. In your own private time, you have no responsibility to lead the people around you to worship.
And that's for everyone, not just the worship leaders.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Vocals, musos, worship leaders.
KK in the back.
KK in the back, as long as he's also doing his job and making us sound good.
Just twisting those knobs and big sweeping actions.
With fire from the Lord. But I would also say, and I really love this. I've heard this said from a public speaker. He's a public speaker called Vin Giang. He's a magician who teaches people to speak better publicly, right? And he likens our voice, because he's obviously a public speaking coach. He likens our voice to an instrument, and he says, look, your voice is an instrument with a ton of capability, right? But most of us play our voice using the same notes over and over again. And what he tries to do is to help people use their voice in a way which utilizes the full range, just like a piano, the full range of a piano. And when people first try to do that, they feel weird. They feel like it's inauthentic. They feel like it's over the top because they're like, oh, I've never done that before. And then when they do it in front of somebody who's known them for a long time, they're like, oh, you're so weird. Why are you suddenly like speaking so high, so low, so, like so extra? But what he says is that's not inauthentic. It's just, you're just not used to it. It's just unfamiliar. So just like how a musician would learn to expand their repertoire of how they would be able to express their worship through different sounds, different octaves, different ways of playing. If we bring that to a worship team context, what we're learning to do is to explore those boundaries as well in terms of how high do I lift my hands? Like I'm used to this, but is it inauthentic if I go all the way? Is it inauthentic if I'm jumping around a bit crazier than I would? And so from a worship team perspective, I would encourage us that it's not inauthentic for you to be over the top. It is just unfamiliar. And that actually can become your authentic self if you just recognize that you're just learning to be more expressive than what you're used to.
Oh, that's a fine encouragement. Thank you for that. I think that definitely gives me a bit of comfort, and I hope it encourages us who's heard that to actually put that into practice as well. And one thing that I think is to sort of put a lot of what we talked about in context is there's a book I read by Mike Cosper called Rhythms of Grace, and he's talking about worship. And he says there's 3 audiences in worship. And it sort of debunks that idea that we have an audience of one, which is what Matt Redman had taught for many, many years. And I think it doesn't devalue that concept because that's primarily why we're worshiping. But he says there's actually, it's called worship 1, 2, 3. So worship for the audience of one, but the secondary audience is the congregation. Those who are gathered, and for us, because we are on a platform ministry, we are actually trying to facilitate the congregation's worship. So we have to be wary of where they're at. And so our role on the platform then must involve that over-gesturing, if you like, to help encourage them to then enter into God's presence with us, to really worship with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, with their bodies as well, because we believe that's a biblical expression of worship. And then I think, and I don't think we've got time to slip into the question of production and entertainment, but the third audience, he says, is the seeker. So we don't design services primarily for the seeker because that's a failed experiment from the 80s, and churches like Willow Creek, even Bill Hybels has said that. But it's about what I like Harold Best says. He says is about sensitively seeking. Sensitively seeking, meaning we're seeking the Lord. That's our primary goal. As a congregation, we're seeking the Lord, but we're also sensitive to the people around us who aren't in the same frame of mind as we are. And so those who are lost, those who are far from God, they also need to be sensitively led back into God's presence as well. So I really like that concept that actually brings all of this together. And then I think the charge of things like, have we moved into the sphere of entertainment, for example? Like we had a big production over Easter and it was pretty special looking. And you got to ask, how much of that is worshipful? Is it at all? And I would say it was very worshipful. I love the moment when because he lives at the back and everyone just like threw their arms up. I don't think I could have done that with my voice. All my music, all my actions, it needed a bit of Tom Chow magic in the back too. Any thoughts on that? No?
I think definitely I agree with what you said, that there are 3 audiences. Or rather, I guess what I have in my mind is we cannot be too simplistic to just say, well, when I'm on stage, it's just only for the Lord. But we have to recognize that our primary function as a worship team is multifaceted. We are there, like we said, we're there to lead, which means that we have to be mindful of the people that are in front of us, which includes believers and unbelievers. We also have to be mindful, I think, in a strange sense, that our role in a smaller way, we are also teaching. Like for example, if you ask someone, well, do you remember what Amos talked about on Easter? Maybe half the people here would be like, But if you ask them what are the lyrics for this particular song and stuff like that, they'd be able to recite like what it is. So I think our role as well is, as we choose songs and whatnot, we are also shaping the theology of the church in some sense. So I think, back to what I was saying, we have got different things that we have to toggle, and so we have to be mindful of that. And something that I want to hone in on that we might have just kind of slipped over for musos as well. Please note that all of us, we are worship leaders in that sense. We are leading people into God's presence. It's not just the worship leaders, not just people who are on Vox that are lifting up their hands and demonstrating, modeling that worship, even as you're playing guitar, even as you're drumming and whatnot. I find it such an encouragement when, like the video pans on like live streams and stuff, and you see drummers like just worshiping when it's a quiet time, guitarists who are really worshiping, and then it kind of sticks out as well when all of a sudden it pans to a muso who's just sitting there waiting for the next part, and it's like, oh man. So I think just be mindful of these things, that it's not as simplistic as, oh, we just here to worship God. No, there's so much more to it. And the more we start to think about it, the more we start to appreciate these things, I think the better we can do it.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks for that. Yes, we are out of time. So I'll just quickly wrap this up with a quote I found from Tozer, which I thought was pretty funny because he's generally quite funny. He says, "The church today is suffering from a rash of amateurism. Any untrained, unprepared, unspiritual, empty rattletrap of a fellow who's a bit ambitious can start something religious. Then we all listen to him, pay him for it, promote him, and work to try to help this fellow who never heard from God in the first place." And I think when I read that, there's an element there where, to come back to Dave's original point, there's an aspect of excellence that we have to bring to our craft. But there's also a spiritual element too. And it's not just about, well, now we've got rid of the amateurism. Have we heard from God? Are we spiritually aligned to Him? And so Tozer kind of captures both sides of that in that one paragraph. So the encouragement for us, I think, is to keep bringing our craft and bringing our excellence, and now look beyond just your musicality, but also how you engage people from the platform with your actions, your facial expressions, your gestures, and the space you occupy on stage. But then don't forget the spiritual authenticity behind it as well, that we are worshiping God out of a place of overflow, of our devotion, of loving Him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. So thanks, Dave and Lester. Now give them a good hand for being part of the panel today.
We come to the end of today's episode, and once again, we're really thankful. We're so privileged to have you join us on our journey as we talk more about acceptable worship to our God. And we just want to encourage you, if you know people out there, people that you serve within ministry who would benefit from this podcast in general, we encourage you to share this with them. Just so whatever questions that they may have, it might be answered through our podcast. And just so we're building the body of Christ together as we learn more and journey on together to understand what worship truly means. How do we worship our God acceptably? And if you haven't followed us, if you haven't subscribed to us, we encourage you to do so. If there's anything you want to say, to reach out to us, anything that you feel like you resonated with in our sharings, we encourage you to plonk it down on the comment section, and we'll definitely get back to you. So otherwise, we thank you once again for joining in with us, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you then.